Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again with our 10-2 changes for healers of sorts. This week, we got the announcement for 10-2 to be launched just after BlizzCon in November. So it's November 7th, I believe, right? There we go. Yeah. So November 7th, which means we only have a handful of weeks till the patch actually is going to be coming out, like 3 weeks. And as a result, I'm shocked by today's changes because there's just like weak sauce going on. Mistweaver getting some clouded focus changes. Once again, not really promoting another better build, just kind of nerfing the talents themselves. And so you're kind of like, I guess, sliding away from it, but not really having anything coming around. So it's stacking twice instead of 3 times, and not increasing the healing of Vivify and Developing before the first application. Vivify and Invigorating Mists, if you don't know what that is, it's a result of your Vivifies. That healing's been increased by 12%. So your Vivify healing is still strong, but your output during Clouded Focus isn't as powerful, which pretty much just makes the spec better outside of its big crazy ramp stuff, I guess, a bit. You know, Team Harmony, I believe this is also last week that they reverted it used to be 20%, then it went to 15, and I guess now it's back to 20. They also make sure that Phalanx Stomp's healing and damage has been increased by 100%, which is a pretty good sign for Mistweaver Monk. I think the spec actually is looking pretty good for dungeons, and kind of slowly gets like better and better changes each week for dungeons in like very small ways. Bounce back triggers after receiving 12% of your health and damage instead of 15, and lasts 2 more seconds. This is from Mistweaver. This might be just like crazy broken. Even though Fortifying Brew is like really mid, you probably are still just not running it at all as a monk. You're getting bounce back, getting buffed, expel harm, doing a ton of healing on PTR right now. I think monk might be one of the more survivable healers, and that could be really clutch for them going into next season, because they also have a melee kick, and we know, and the right dispel profile. Oh my gosh. So a lot of good news for monk, actually, even though there's like weird things with clouded focus and unison happening, and you know, making sure monks don't get trolled by having somebody click off their life cocoon. For Holy Pally, Reclamation, this is the refunded mana from Crusader Strike and Holy Shock. This was 15%. I believe it is still 15% on live servers now. They went from 15% to 12%, now to 10%. And this is competing with Barrier of Faith, right? So it's strange to me that they, you know, the more that they're nerfing Reclamation, the more that it ends up like, I guess you might as well run Barrier, but then it's another cooldown. It's another button you have to add for, you know, some more passive nonsense. It's very frustrating. But then they're also increasing the mana cost of Holy Shock, right? Very, very strange. Holy Pally is one of those specs that feels very weird when they get these mana nerfs, because it's like, well, what are you supposed to do, right? I guess you get like forced into hard casting spells when you're at risk of running or I guess, you know, spending like infusion on like flash or something along those lines. But it's weird. It's not like your spec really has like crazy mana dumpers. It's like, gotta make sure I conserve mana by not hitting Crusader Strike. Oh gosh, you know, weird. Holy Reverb's healing has been decreased by 10%. Honestly, this is like no surprise. They nerfed Reverb's healing before, but then they made it interact with Mastery. And so it kind of felt like a net buff. And so Reverberation's been doing crazy healing on PTR. So I'm not surprised or really disappointed at all by this change. They also made it so the reverb can stack up to 6 times. If you don't know what it is, basically when you Holy Shock a target and the glimmer is removed or it's refreshed, it kind of puts like a little hot on the target as a result. And so it's like, if you Holy Shock somebody too many times, it would just not add past 3 for whatever reason. So I don't know why there's really any cap at all to it, because it's not like it'd be super crazy insane if you just kept Holy Shocking one target, because they all have independent timers for them. So eventually you wouldn't be able to add more to the equation. But hey, whatever, right? What do we got for Shaman? I thought this was last week's build. Maybe I'm crazy, but they're getting a Riptide healing increase for 20% instead of the 15%. And they're actually reducing the cost of chain heal by just a little bit. And this is pretty interesting too, because when I was doing a lot of testing on Shaman, they were getting like very steady buffs to like chain heal, and like steady buffs, like a lot of buffs to like single target, to the point where I felt like you weren't going to chain heal whatsoever. And now they're like slowly kind of like bringing the spec into feeling more comfortable to alternate between the occasional chain heals, in addition to just building primarily towards single target. This I think is quite good, because whenever you needed to like really blast output, especially in like a dungeon environment, if you didn't have Ascendance, you didn't have AG, which, if I remember correct, all got nerfed going into 10.2, then you just felt really bad hitting chain heals that would just you in an instant. And so having a slight bit of mana cost reduction, it's like kind of moving him in the right direction. I do think that Shaman does look pretty good for the incoming raid, particularly because of how much single target output it's sort of naturally producing. And then if you're able to have chain heal on hand when you really need to blast AoE, that'll be good too. But some of the fights when we did our latest testing for Tindril, there's these moments where you do need some healers to be blasting AoE as hard as they can, but you also need people who are doing great single target output because some targets or some allies are having really heavy dots on them. So it's actually kind of good. I will say I am just shocked and awed by the fact that there's not any priest changes going to be coming into the mix. I'm I'm baffled. I'm not going to actually lie. It's really, really strange to me because Disc could be potentially going into the next tier with multiple capstones feeling like dead weight and feeling like super, super poor. If you haven't been keeping up with the changes, it looks like we're headed down the route of like really heavy Mindbender and making sure we're always running like Divine Aegis kind of stuff. Like every 30 seconds, you kind of produce a ramp with double Radiance charges, and then you have like a stronger ramp, of course, with your Evangelism. That being said, it's just a little bit strange that there's not extra competition for your talents. It looked like they were moving towards that point where it's like, oh, sometimes you want Uppy, sometimes you want, Blaze, sometimes, you might want something else. And, as it turns out, it seems like the builds are going to be a little bit more one-dimensional. There's a own, like, challenge, and there's fun with it, of course, but I was really hoping for, like, more talent variety instead of, like, all the good stuff you're just naturally able to take, and then there's some talents that are just kind of bad. Like, that was what we have with, like, Paladin, you know what I mean? And you're like, oh, you got Daybreak, oh, you got Tears, oh, and, like, whatever you get after that, whatever, have fun, right? That's kind of a strange thing. Interesting to note, the Revival Catalyst is available, of course, during the first week of Season 3, which is going to be the 14th, right? But players will only gain a charge every 2 weeks instead of every week. Notably, we do still have the achievement, I believe. If you get KSM or you get ahead of the curve, you also get another piece of tier on hand. And I believe the end boss is also having those curios, but I might have to double check on that one. But yeah, the tier armor tokens will continue to drop at the current rate of 1 to 3 relative to the non-tier loot. By shifting more of the tier acquisition to the Catalyst and away from tier, we expect players will complete tier bonuses at the same rate or faster than Season 2. While raiders will still enjoy an edge as the season begins, players who prefer not to raid will be far closer behind them than previously. So again, that's really no surprise. I think for this raid, and I think with how Season 2 went, they want to get people into the raid. And I think that they've made a lot of improvements. I just made a video as well giving my first impressions about Amir Drazil. But I think this raid is looking a lot better than Aberrus. And I think it's going to be a lot better than Vaults of the Incarnate. So I do think that these changes, while they're going to be like punishing to the M+ mains, and I get it, they're going to push you into the raid. And I think WoW as a whole is always going to try to push people into the raid about as much as they really can, right? The very rare item drops have been further adjusted and now have a chance to drop in addition to a boss's typical quantity of loot. A 20-player group will receive 1 tier token, 3 non-tiers, and Dreambinder Loom of the Great Cycle. They said as we continue to iterate on the very rare items, we hope that elevating them to drop independently as bonus loot will feel less frustrating than knowing that Ice Wrath channeling Conduit could have been a Whispering Incarnate icon. Yep, this also ensures the drop rates are consistent across all very rare items. It's kind of interesting that they brought up the Whispering Incarnate icon, since that's a Vault of the Incarnates item. It almost makes you wonder if there's going to be some kind of Fated season a little bit later on down the line. But at least that's going to be my assumption. If you guys aren't sure about this current rate, this 1 to 3 type of thing, at the beginning of Aberrus, there was a really high rate of teardrops. And it took until like 10.15 or a couple weeks after 10.15 that they actually toned down the amount of tier loot that you got. So you got other non-tier loot, because by then everybody already had their tier sets. So they're kind of keeping this current rate of less tier because they anticipate the Catalyst being the primary way, or that people are like completing their tier sets. But obviously LFR, normal, heroic, mythic, all of those things to get the initial pieces is going to be like the priority. So in all, I think that it might be tier list season coming around the corner. And that's going to be kind of frustrating because I'm sure they're going to have a lot of last minute changes, especially with BlizzCon around the corner. I would not be surprised at all to see them make some changes to healers while like we're away at BlizzCon or like the day after or something along those lines, because there's just so many things that they need to clean up, particularly for healers going on right now. Holy Pally's output, I mean, I feel like these are sort of like fair changes. I feel like how they're trying to bring down Mistweaver is strange at best. I'm surprised that Resto Druid isn't getting more attention. Same with this, because they're changing a lot with how Resto Druid is playing, and then they, of course, are wreaking havoc across cooldowns, both for Druid and but like also heavily for Shaman. And then it's looking at like, well, what are you making up for it? What kind of changes are you making? And overall, it's very strange. There's continuously these sort of like promises of like, oh, the healer changes are coming, right? Or the rumors. But I think that we might be walking in with just a little bit more tuning. I think Disc Sins the Many is probably going to get nerfed it in a week or two or whatever it is before the season to reduce their damage, because currently they're gapping people like crazy. But I do think that like other talent adjustments are probably over at this point, and we'd have to be waiting until like 10.2.5 for some more, which is frustrating because it seems like the 0.5 patches this expansion have really been like, here's how we complete and here's how we finish what should have happened at the 0.2, 0.1, 0.0 patches, right? So we'll see, guys. But otherwise, if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. Let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying these updates, and tier lists are going to be around the corner very soon. Cheers, guys.